I never thought my passion for urban exploration would lead me down such a dark path. It all started when I was wandering through an abandoned mall in Detroit. I'd been doing this for years, sneaking into forgotten buildings and documenting what I found. But this time was different. In the back of an old electronics store, I stumbled across a dusty laptop. Out of curiosity, I booted it up, surprised to find it still had some battery life. The desktop was empty except for a single folder labeled Darknet Access. Inside was a text file with instructions on how to access the dark web. I'd always been intrigued by the dark web, but never had the guts to explore it myself. Finding these instructions felt like a sign. So when I got home to my apartment in Chicago, I followed them step by step. Soon enough, I was browsing onion sites, fascinated by this hidden world. Most of what I found was pretty tame: drug markets, hacking forums, that sort of thing. But then I came across a site called the Collectors Club. It looked like some kind of auction house, but the items for sale were disturbing. Personal information, blackmail material, even what looked like live video feeds of people's homes. I was about to click away when I noticed a listing that made my blood run cold. It was for a complete life archive of someone living in Chicago. The description mentioned years of photos, videos, and personal data. But what really got me was the name. It was my next-door neighbor, Sarah. I knew I should have just closed the browser and forgotten about it. But I couldn't shake the feeling that if I didn't do something, Sarah might be in danger. So I made an account and placed a bid, hoping to at least find out who was behind this. To my surprise, I won the auction pretty easily. The seller, username The Collector, sent me a message with instructions on how to access the files. They also asked if I was interested in expanding my collection and offered to show me how to gather my own data. I played along, telling them I was new to this, but eager to learn. The collector seemed excited to have a protégé. They started sending me tips and tricks for gathering information: how to hack into security cameras, clone cell phones, even plant hidden microphones. At first, I just pretended to follow their instructions, hoping to gather enough information to go to the police. But as days turned into weeks, I found myself actually trying some of their techniques. I told myself it was just to maintain my cover, but deep down I knew there was a part of me that was fascinated by the power of it all. I started small, hacking into my own devices to see if I could do it. Then I moved on to public cameras in my neighborhood. Before I knew it, I was sitting in my apartment watching live feeds from dozens of sources around the city. The collector was impressed with my progress. They invited me to join a more exclusive part of the site where the real collectors hung out. It was there that I learned the true scope of what was happening. These people weren't just random hackers. They were organized with members all over the world. They called themselves the Watchers, and their goal was to collect as much data on as many people as possible. They believed that information was the ultimate form of power, and they were obsessed with gathering it. I was in way over my head, but I couldn't stop. Every day I dug deeper into this twisted world. I learned how to access private security systems, tap into cell networks, even manipulate smart home devices. The amount of information I could gather on anyone was staggering. The collector became my mentor, teaching me all their tricks. They showed me how to compile a life archive like the one I'd originally bought. It was frighteningly complete. Every email, every text message, every photo or video taken, even recordings from inside people's homes. I told myself I was just gathering evidence, that once I had enough, I'd turn it all over to the authorities. But every time I thought about coming forward, I found a reason to wait. Just a little more information, just one more trick to learn. Months passed, and I was in deep. I'd created archives on dozens of people, not just in Chicago, but all over the country. The Watchers were impressed with my work, and I was climbing the ranks in their organization. But then something happened that snapped me back to reality. The collectors sent me a new assignment. They wanted me to create an archive on my own family. They said it was a test of loyalty, to prove I was fully committed to the cause. That's when I realized how far I'd fallen. I'd become the very thing I'd initially set out to stop. I was no longer pretending to be one of them, but I had become one of them. I spent days agonizing over what to do. I knew I had to stop, but I also knew the Watchers wouldn't just let me walk away. They had dirt on everyone, including me. If I tried to expose them, they'd destroy my life. In the end, I decided I had to take the risk. I couldn't live with myself if I continued down this path. I gathered all the evidence I could, server locations, member lists, archive copies, and put it all on an encrypted drive. I didn't trust the local police with this, so I drove to Washington, D.C. I walked into the FBI headquarters and asked to speak to someone about a cybercrime case. I half expected to be arrested on the spot, but they actually listened to me. For hours, I sat in an interrogation room, telling them everything. I held nothing back, not even my own crimes. I gave them the encrypted drive and told them how to access it. The agents were stunned by what I revealed. They said it was one of the largest cybercrime operations they'd ever seen. They took me into protective custody while they began their investigation. Over the next few weeks, I worked with the FBI to take down the Watchers. My insider knowledge was crucial in navigating their networks and finding their vulnerabilities. It was surreal, dismantling the very system I'd helped to build. As the case progressed, I learned the true scale of what the Watchers had been doing. They hadn't just been collecting data. They'd been using it to manipulate people, influence elections, even topple governments. The power they wielded was beyond anything I'd imagined. One by one, we took down their servers and arrested key members. The collector was one of the last to fall. When they were brought in, I was shocked to discover it was someone I knew in real life. A quiet librarian who lived just a few blocks from me. In the end, hundreds of people were arrested across the globe. The amount of data we recovered was staggering. Petabytes of personal information on millions of people. The FBI said it would take years to sift through it all and notify the victims. As for me, I didn't get off scot-free. I had committed crimes, even if my intentions at the end were good. But because of my cooperation, I was given a plea deal. I'll be serving time, but far less than I would have if I'd been caught another way. I'm writing this from a minimum security prison where I'm serving my sentence. In a way, I'm grateful for this time. It's given me a chance to reflect on everything that happened and how easily I was seduced by the power of information. I've learned a hard lesson about the dangers of the dark web and how it can corrupt even those with good intentions. The internet is a powerful tool, but it can also be a weapon in the wrong hands. I hope my story serves as a warning to others who might be tempted to explore the darker corners of the web. When I get out, I plan to use my skills for good. The FBI has already talked to me about potentially working with them to prevent this kind of thing from happening again. It's a chance at redemption that I don't intend to waste. It all started when I was browsing Reddit late one night in my apartment in Seattle. I'd just finished a long shift at the coffee shop and was trying to unwind. That's when I stumbled across a post about the dark web. I'd heard about it before, but never really looked into it. The post was full of people sharing their experiences, and I got curious. I figured it couldn't hurt to check it out, so I downloaded Tor and started exploring. At first, it was pretty boring. Just a bunch of dead links and sketchy marketplaces. But then I found this forum that seemed different. It was called The Watchers, and it was full of people talking about surveillance and privacy. I created an account and started reading through the threads. Most of it was pretty standard stuff. People worried about government spying, tips for staying anonymous online, that kind of thing. But there was this one user who kept hinting at something bigger. They went by the username Eyes Everywhere and claimed to have inside knowledge of some massive surveillance network. I messaged them, thinking it was probably just some conspiracy nut. But the response I got back was unsettling. They asked if I wanted to see the truth, said they could show me how deep the rabbit hole really went. I should have known better, but curiosity got the best of me. I said yes. Eyes Everywhere sent me a link to a live video feed. When I clicked it, I saw a grainy image of a bedroom. There was someone sleeping in the bed. I figured it was just some random webcam stream until I noticed something familiar on the nightstand. A photo frame I recognized. It was my bedroom. That was me sleeping in the bed. I freaked out and slammed my laptop shut. My heart was racing as I looked around my room, searching for hidden cameras. I couldn't find anything obvious, but I knew someone had been watching me. I barely slept that night, constantly feeling like there were eyes on me. The next day, I messaged Eyes Everywhere again, demanding answers. They just sent back a cryptic response about how we're all being watched all the time. Said if I wanted to know more, I had to prove I was serious. They gave me an address in downtown Seattle and told me to go there at midnight if I wanted the truth. I knew it was a bad idea, but I couldn't let it go. I had to know how they'd gotten that footage of me. So at 11:30 that night, I headed downtown. The address turned out to be an old, abandoned office building. I stood outside for a while, debating whether to go in. Just as I was about to leave, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Eyes Everywhere, 3rd floor, room 305. Against my better judgment, I went inside. The building was dark and smelled musty, like it hadn't been used in years. I used my phone's flashlight to find the stairs and made my way up to the 3rd floor. Room 305 was at the end of a long hallway. The door was slightly ajar. I pushed it open slowly, my heart pounding in my chest. The room was empty, except for a single chair facing an old CRT television. As soon as I stepped inside, the door slammed shut behind me, and the TV flickered to life. What I saw made my blood run cold. It was footage of me from dozens of different angles. Me at work, at the grocery store, walking down the street. Even more disturbing were the shots from inside my apartment, me eating dinner, watching TV, sleeping. They'd been watching me for months, maybe longer. I tried to leave, but the door was locked. Then a voice came from hidden speakers, telling me to sit down. I didn't have a choice. For the next hour, they showed me more footage, not just of me, but of hundreds of other people too. All of them going about their daily lives, completely unaware they were being watched. The voice explained that this was just a small part of a vast network. They had eyes and ears everywhere. In our homes, our workplaces, on the streets. They claimed it was all in the name of security, of keeping society safe. But I could tell there was something more sinister behind it. Finally, the TV went dark and the door unlocked. The voice told me I could leave, but warned me not to tell anyone what I'd seen. Said they'd be watching, and there would be consequences if I talked. I practically ran out of that building. When I got home, I was a mess. I spent hours searching my apartment for hidden cameras or microphones, but couldn't find anything. I knew they were there, though. I could feel it. For weeks after that, I was paranoid. I covered all my webcams, swept for bugs daily, and avoided using my phone or computer as much as possible. I started seeing surveillance cameras everywhere I went, wondering if they were part of the network. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was constantly being monitored. I thought about going to the police, but what could I tell them? I had no proof, and for all I knew, they might be in on it too. I considered reaching out to some of the other people I'd seen in the footage, but I was afraid of what might happen if I did. Eventually, I couldn't take it anymore. I quit my job, sold most of my stuff, and bought an old van. I figured if I kept moving, it'd be harder for them to track me. I've been on the road for a couple months now, staying off the grid as much as possible. I use cash only, avoid social media, and try to stay away from big cities. But even out here in the middle of nowhere, I still feel like I'm being watched. Sometimes I catch glimpses of strange cars following me, or notice people staring a little too long at gas stations. I don't know if it's really them, or if I'm just being paranoid. Maybe this is all in my head. Maybe I imagined the whole thing. All I know is that I can't go back to my old life. I've seen behind the curtain, and there's no unseeing it. The world isn't what we think it is. There are eyes everywhere, always watching, always listening. And once you know that, you can never feel truly safe again. I don't know what I'm going to do now. Keep running, I suppose. Try to stay one step ahead of them, even though I know that's probably impossible. Maybe someday I'll find a way to expose what's really going on, but for now, I'm just focused on surviving. If you're reading this, be careful. Watch what you say, what you do, because you never know who might be watching. They're out there, in the shadows, always watching. And once they've got their eyes on you, there's no escaping their gaze. Stay safe out there. And remember, just because you can't see them doesn't mean they can't see you. I was stuck in my tiny apartment in Austin, Texas, bored out of my mind during a heat wave. The AC was barely keeping up, and I'd binged every show on Netflix. That's when I remembered my old buddy Jake talking about this thing called the dark web. He'd always go on about how it was this wild frontier of the internet full of crazy stuff you couldn't find anywhere else. I figured, why not? It's not like I had anything better to do. So I started looking up how to access it. Turns out it's not that hard. Just needed to download this special browser called Tor. Once I got that set up, I was off to the races. At first, it was pretty underwhelming. Most of the sites were just boring forums or broken links. But then I stumbled across this marketplace called Black Market Bonanza. It was like Amazon, but for all sorts of illegal stuff. Drugs, weapons, fake IDs, you name it, they had it. I'm not into any of that, but I couldn't help browsing out of curiosity. That's when I saw a listing that caught my eye. Untraceable poison. Guaranteed results. Now, I'm not a murderer or anything, but something about it just fascinated me. I clicked on the listing to see more details. The seller, who went by the username Death Dealer, had all sorts of testimonials from satisfied customers. They claimed their poison was completely undetectable in autopsies and could mimic the symptoms of a heart attack. It was expensive as hell, but they offered a small sample for cheap. I don't know what came over me, but I decided to buy it. Not to use it, of course, just to see if it was real. I figured it was probably just some baking soda or something. I used some Bitcoin I had left over from a few years ago when I thought I was going to get rich quick. A few days later, a small package arrived. It was just a plain envelope with no return address. Inside was a tiny vial of clear liquid and a note with instructions. I held it up to the light, half expecting it to be water. But there was something off about it. It had a faint, shimmer to it that I'd never seen before. I hid the vial in my sock drawer and tried to forget about it. But I couldn't stop thinking about it. Was it really poison? Could it actually kill someone without leaving a trace? I found myself taking it out and looking at it every day, wondering what would happen if I just put a drop in someone's drink. I know, that's messed up. I'm not a bad person, I swear. I was just curious. And bored, dangerously bored. Weeks went by, and the vial just sat there in my drawer. I'd almost forgotten about it when I got an email from Death Dealer. They wanted to know if I'd tried the sample yet and if I was interested in buying more. I didn't respond, but it got me thinking again. That's when things started to get weird. I began noticing strange cars parked outside my apartment. People I didn't recognize would smile at me on the street like they knew me. My phone started acting up, apps opening on their own. I tried to convince myself I was just being paranoid, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I started spending more time on the dark web looking for answers. That's how I found this forum called the Poisoners Guild. It was a whole community of people obsessed with poisons. Some were into it for academic reasons, studying the history and chemistry of it. Others were less academic. They traded recipes, shared stories of their kills, even had a points system for different methods. I created an account telling myself it was just to learn more about what I'd bought. But before I knew it, I was deep in conversations with these people. They welcomed me like I was an old friend, eager to share their knowledge. One user, Venom Master, took me under their wing. They started teaching me about different types of poisons, how to extract them from plants, how to administer them without getting caught. It was fascinating stuff in a really messed up way. I found myself spending hours on the forum soaking up all this information. I even started doing my own research, buying books on toxicology and chemistry. It was like I'd found this whole new world that I never knew existed. But then Venom Master suggested we meet in person. They said they had some rare samples they wanted to show me. That's when reality hit me like a truck. What the hell was I doing? I was talking about murder with strangers on the internet. I'd bought actual poison. This wasn't some game or hobby. It was serious, dangerous stuff. I tried to back out, told Venom Master I wasn't interested in meeting up. But they didn't take no for an answer. They started sending me messages every day, getting more and more insistent. They said they knew where I lived, that we were in this together now. I panicked. I deleted my account on the forum, threw away the vial of poison, even smashed my computer. But the damage was done. I'd left a trail, and now someone was following it right to my door. For weeks, I jumped at every sound. I'd see shadows moving outside my window at night. My mail started going missing. Someone kept calling my phone and hanging up as soon as I answered. I thought about going to the police, but what would I tell them? That I bought poison on the dark web, and now I think someone's after me. They'd arrest me on the spot. So I did the only thing I could think of. I ran. I packed a bag, emptied my bank account, and bought a bus ticket to the other side of the country. I ended up in a small town in Maine, working cash jobs and keeping my head down. But I can't shake the feeling that it's not over. Sometimes I'll see someone on the street that looks like they don't belong, watching me a little too closely. My new laptop acts weird sometimes, like someone's controlling it remotely. I don't know if it's really them or if I'm just going crazy. Maybe this is all in my head. Maybe I imagined the whole thing. But I can't take that chance. I'm always looking over my shoulder, always ready to run again. I know now that the dark web isn't just some harmless playground. It's a dangerous place full of real people doing real, terrible things. And once you step into that world, it's hard to ever fully step out. So here I am, hiding out in a town I never heard of before. jumping at shadows and hoping I haven't become the very thing I was so fascinated by. I don't know what the future holds, but I know I can never go back to my old life. If you're reading this and thinking about exploring the dark web, take it from me, don't. Some doors once opened can never be closed. Some curiosities are better left unsatisfied. The dark web isn't a game or a novelty. It's a pit that can swallow you whole if you're not careful. It all started when I lost my job at the tech startup in San Francisco. Suddenly, I had way too much free time and not enough money. My roommate suggested I try making some cash online, maybe doing some freelance work or selling stuff on eBay. I wanted something more exciting, you know? That's when I remembered hearing about the dark web from some guys at a party. They were going on about how you could find anything there, make loads of money if you knew what you were doing. So I figured, why not give it a shot? I downloaded Tor and started poking around. Most of it was pretty boring at first, drug markets, hacking forums, that kind of thing. But then I stumbled across this site called Taskmasters. It was like a job board, but for less than legal activities. Now, I'm not talking about anything really messed up. Mostly it was stuff like small-time hacking jobs, gathering information on people, that sort of thing. I started with some easy tasks like finding someone's address or hacking into their social media. It paid pretty well, and I told myself it wasn't really hurting anyone. As I completed more tasks, I started getting offered bigger jobs. That's when things began to get a bit sketchy. One client wanted me to hack into a company's database and steal their customer information. Another wanted me to set up a botnet for a DDoS attack on some website. I knew it was wrong, but the money was good, and I kept telling myself it was just temporary until I found a real job. Plus, there was this rush I got from each successful job. It felt like I was in some kind of spy movie, you know. Then I got an offer that was too good to pass up. Someone wanted me to hack into a small local bank in Portland, Oregon. They said they just wanted to prove it could be done, that they wouldn't actually steal anything. And the payout was insane. More money than I'd make in a year at my old job. I spent weeks preparing for it. I learned everything I could about the bank's systems, their security protocols, everything. I even flew to Portland and scouted out the physical location, looking for any weaknesses I could exploit. Finally, I was ready. I set up in a small motel room outside the city, surrounded by computers and equipment. At 2 a.m., I made my move. It took hours of intense work, but I finally broke through their firewall and got access to their systems. That's when things went sideways. As soon as I was in, alarms started blaring on my computer. It was a trap. The bank's security team had been waiting for me. They'd known about the attack before I even started. I panicked and tried to cover my tracks, but it was too late. They had my IP address, and I knew it wouldn't be long before they traced it back to me. I grabbed what I could and ran, leaving most of my equipment behind. I drove non-stop for hours, heading east with no real destination in mind. I ditched my phone, my laptop, anything that could be used to track me. I paid cash for everything and slept in my car at rest stops. After a few days, I ended up in a small town in Colorado. I found a cheap motel and tried to figure out my next move. That's when I saw the news. The FBI had raided my apartment in San Francisco. They were calling it one of the biggest cybercrime busts in recent history. Turns out, Taskmasters wasn't just some random dark website. It was a front for a massive criminal organization. They'd been using people like me to do their dirty work, building up a network of hackers and criminals across the country. And I'd walked right into their trap. They'd set up that bank job as a test to see how far I'd go. And I'd failed spectacularly. Now I was on the run, wanted by both the FBI and the crime syndicate I'd unwittingly been working for. I knew I couldn't stay in one place for long. I started moving from town to town, taking odd jobs for cash and staying off the grid as much as possible. I dyed my hair, grew a beard, did everything I could to change my appearance. But no matter where I went, I couldn't shake the feeling that they were right behind me. I'd see a car parked across the street for too long, or notice someone watching me in a diner. It was probably just paranoia, but I couldn't take any chances. I tried reaching out to my family, my old friends, anyone who might be able to help. But as soon as they heard my voice, they'd hang up. I was toxic now, a liability to anyone who associated with me. Months passed and I kept moving. I worked as a farmhand in Nebraska, a dishwasher in Texas, a night watchman in New Mexico. I never stayed in one place for more than a few weeks. It was a lonely, exhausting existence. I thought about turning myself in, but the fear of what might happen kept me running. I'd seen enough crime shows to know what happens to hackers in prison. And that was assuming the FBI got to me before the taskmasters did. As time went on, I started to piece together more about the organization I'd been working for. They weren't just into cybercrime. They had their fingers in everything from drug trafficking to weapons dealing. And they did not take kindly to people who screwed up their operations. I heard rumors about what happened to other hackers who'd been caught. Some disappeared without a trace. Others turned up dead in ways that looked like accidents. It was clear that these people were not to be messed with. I tried to lay low, to stay off their radar. But it's not easy to disappear completely in the digital age. Every time I used an ATM or showed up on a security camera, I risked exposing my location. I became obsessed with covering my tracks, always looking over my shoulder. One day, while I was working at a gas station in Arizona, I overheard a conversation that made my blood run cold. Two guys were talking about a hacker who'd been caught trying to rip off some big organization. They mentioned taskmasters by name. I didn't stick around to hear more. I grabbed what I could from the cash register and ran. It wasn't much, but it was enough to buy a bus ticket to the next state over. I spent the next few days hitchhiking, trying to put as much distance between me and that gas station as possible. That close call made me realize I couldn't keep running forever. Sooner or later, my luck would run out. I needed a plan. Some way to get out of this mess I'd created for myself. I started thinking about what I knew, what kind of information I had that might be valuable. I'd seen a lot during my time working for taskmasters. I knew names, operations, methods they used. Maybe I could use that as leverage, make some kind of deal. But who could I trust? The FBI was still after me. And I had no way of knowing if taskmasters had infiltrated. Local police were out of the question. Too risky. I needed someone who had the power to protect me but wasn't connected to any of this. That's when I remembered an old news story about a journalist who'd exposed a major government scandal. She had a reputation for protecting her sources and taking on powerful interests. If anyone could help me, it was her. It took some doing, but I managed to track down her email address. I sent her a message, being as vague as possible while still trying to pique her interest. I told her I had information about a major criminal organization, something that could blow the lid off the biggest cybercrime operation in the country. Days passed with no response. I was starting to lose hope when finally I got a reply. She wanted to meet. She gave me an address in Washington, D.C. and a time, 3 days from now. I knew it was risky, but what choice did I have? This might be my only chance to get out of this mess. So I scraped together what little money I had left and bought a bus ticket to D.C. the whole way there. I was a nervous wreck. Every time the bus stopped, I expected to see FBI agents or Taskmaster's goons waiting for me, but somehow I made it to D.C. without incident. The meeting place was a small park near the National Mall. I got there early and spent an hour watching for any signs of a trap. When the journalist finally showed up, I almost didn't approach her. But I knew this was my last shot at freedom. We talked for hours. I told her everything. How I got involved with Taskmasters, the jobs I'd done for them, what I knew about their operations. She listened without judgment, taking notes and occasionally asking for clarification. When I was done, she told me she believed me. She said my story corroborated some other information she'd been gathering. But she also made it clear how dangerous this was. Taskmasters had connections everywhere, and they wouldn't hesitate to kill to keep their secrets. She offered to help me, but on one condition: I had to turn myself in to the FBI. She said it was the only way to ensure my safety and to make sure my information was taken seriously. She promised to use her connections to get me a deal, to make sure I was protected. It was a tough decision, but I knew she was right. Running wasn't a long-term solution. So the next day, we walked into the FBI field office together. I surrendered myself and told them everything. The next few months were a whirlwind of debriefings, testimonies, and negotiations. True to her word, the journalist used her influence to get me a deal. In exchange for my cooperation, I'd serve a reduced sentence in a minimum security prison, with the possibility of early release. It wasn't freedom, but it was a hell of a lot better than spending the rest of my life looking over my shoulder. And more importantly, it was a chance to make things right. To use what I knew to bring down an organization that had hurt a lot of people. As I sit here in my cell writing this, I can't help but think about how differently things might have turned out if I'd never stumbled onto that dark website. One stupid decision, made out of boredom and greed, changed the course of my entire life. I guess the moral of the story is this: be careful what you go looking for online. The dark web might seem exciting or mysterious, but it's called the dark web for a reason. Some doors, once opened, can never be closed. And the price of curiosity can be higher than you ever imagine. I'm a college student in Boston majoring in computer science. Pretty normal life. That all changed when I stumbled onto this weird online challenge. It was buried deep in some tech forum I frequent, and it caught my eye immediately. The challenge was simple. Navigate the dark web and find this specific website. The prize? A crazy amount of cryptocurrency. Now, I'd heard about the dark web before, but I'd never actually ventured into it. I mean, who hasn't been curious? But I always thought it was just for creeps and criminals. But man, that prize money was tempting. I was drowning in student debt, and my part-time job at the campus coffee shop barely covered ramen and textbooks. So, against my better judgment, I decided to give it a shot. I did some research, downloaded Tor, and set up all the necessary precautions. VPN, encrypted everything, the works. I felt like some kind of secret agent, you know. It was kind of exciting in a weird way. At first, browsing the dark web was pretty disappointing. Most of the sites were just dead links or obvious scams. But as I dug deeper, things started to get interesting. I found marketplaces selling things I'd never even imagined. Forums discussing topics that made my skin crawl. It was like peeking behind a curtain I didn't even know existed. I spent hours searching for the website mentioned in the challenge. Days turned into weeks, and I was starting to think it was all a wild goose chase. My grades were slipping, and I was spending more time in front of my computer than in class. Then, finally I found it. The website was called The Labyrinth, and it was unlike anything I'd ever seen. It was a maze of interconnected pages, each one filled with cryptic puzzles and coded messages. I realized that finding the site was just the first step. Now I had to navigate this digital maze to claim the prize. I threw myself into solving the puzzles. It became an obsession. I skipped classes, called in sick to work, barely slept. My roommate probably thought I'd lost my mind, but I didn't care. I was so close to the prize, I could almost taste it. As I progressed through the labyrinth, the challenges got harder and weirder. Some required me to decode ancient languages. Others had me solving complex mathematical equations. There were even tasks that involved real-world actions, like finding specific graffiti in Boston and photographing it. But the deeper I went, the more unsettling things became. The puzzles started to feel personal, like they were designed specifically for me. One task required information that only someone who knew me could have known, my childhood pet's name, my first crush, things like that. I tried to shake it off, telling myself it was just coincidence. But then I started noticing other things. My email account showed login attempts from strange locations. My social media feeds were full of ads for things I'd only thought about, never searched for online. It felt like the labyrinth was watching me, learning about me, but that was crazy, right? It was just a website, just a game. At least, that's what I kept telling myself. About a month into this madness, I reached what seemed to be the final stage of the labyrinth. The page was simple, just a countdown clock and a button that said, "Claim your prize." The countdown was set for 48 hours. I was ecstatic. All those sleepless nights, all that work, it was finally going to pay off. I just had to wait 2 more days. Easy, right? Wrong. Those were the longest 48 hours of my life. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. I just sat there staring at that countdown, watching the seconds tick away. My mind was racing, imagining all the things I could do with that money. Pay off my loans, buy a car, maybe even travel the world. When the countdown finally hit 0, my hand was shaking as I clicked the button. The screen went black for a moment, and then a message appeared. "Congratulations! Your prize awaits. Check your email." I nearly fell out of my chair, scrambling to open my email. There it was, a message from an anonymous sender. But instead of instructions on how to claim my cryptocurrency, it contained something else entirely. It was a video. And what I saw in that video made my blood run cold. It was footage of me, not just one clip, but dozens. Me walking to class, working at the coffee shop, even sleeping in my dorm room. The video was time-stamped. Some of the footage was from months ago, long before I'd ever heard of the labyrinth. The final clip was the worst. It showed me, sitting at my computer, clicking that "Claim Your Prize" button. It was from moments ago. The video ended with a message. "The game isn't over. It's only just begun." I freaked out. I disconnected my computer, turned off my phone, pulled the blind shut. My mind was racing. How long had they been watching me? What did they want? I thought about going to the police, but what would I tell them? That I'd been exploring the dark web and now some mysterious entity was stalking me? They'd probably arrest me on the spot. For days I was a nervous wreck. I jumped at every sound, flinched every time I got an email or text. I started seeing hidden cameras everywhere I looked. My roommate thought I was losing it, and honestly, I wasn't sure he was wrong. Just when I thought I was starting to get a handle on things, it got worse. I started receiving packages. Small boxes left outside my dorm room. Each one contained an item from the video. A coffee cup from my work, a book I'd been reading in the library, even a pillowcase from my bed. The final package was the worst. It contained a USB drive. When I finally worked up the courage to check it, I found it full of personal information. My social security number, my bank account details, even medical records. Things that should have been impossible for anyone to access. That's when I realized the true nature of the labyrinth. It wasn't a game or a challenge, it was a trap. A way to gather information on people, to learn their habits, their vulnerabilities. And I'd walked right into it. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't go to the police. Whoever was behind this clearly had access to systems way beyond what I could explain. I couldn't tell my friends or family. I didn't want to put them at risk. So I did the only thing I could think of. I ran. I packed a bag, emptied my bank account, and bought a bus ticket to the other side of the country. I ended up in a small town in Oregon, working odd jobs for cash and trying to stay off the grid. But I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't over. Sometimes I'd see a car parked across the street for too long, or notice someone watching me a little too closely in a store. It was probably just paranoia, but I couldn't take any chances. I tried to start over, to build a new life. But the fear was always there, lurking in the back of my mind. Every time I used a computer or smartphone, I wondered if they were watching. Every security camera I passed made me flinch. Months went by, and slowly things seemed to calm down. No more strange packages, no more unexplained emails. I started to think that maybe, just maybe, I'd managed to slip away from whoever was behind the labyrinth. But then, one day, I came home to find my apartment door slightly ajar. Nothing was missing. Nothing was out of place. Except for one thing. Sitting on my kitchen table was a small box. Inside was a single sheet of paper with 5 words that made my heart stop. It was asking if I was ready for the next level. And just like that, I knew it wasn't over. The game was still on, and I was still a player, whether I wanted to be or not. Looking back, I can't believe how naive I was. I thought I was so smart, so tech-savvy. But in reality, I was just a pawn in someone else's game. The dark web isn't a playground or a challenge to be conquered. It's a dangerous place, full of people who will use your curiosity and greed against you. I don't know what the future holds. I don't know if I'll ever truly be free of the labyrinth. All I can do is keep moving, keep looking over my shoulder, and hope that someday I'll find a way out of this maze. So if you're reading this and thinking about exploring the dark web, take it from me, don't. Some doors once opened can never be closed. Some games once started never truly end. The dark web might seem exciting or mysterious, but trust me, the price of admission is higher than you could ever imagine. Stay in the light where it's safe. Because once you step into the shadows, you might never find your way back out. I was stuck in my tiny apartment in Phoenix, Arizona, bored out of my mind during a heat wave. I just graduated from community college with a degree in graphic design, but the job market was tougher than I expected. After sending out what felt like 1 million resumes and getting 0 responses, I was feeling pretty down. That's when my old high school buddy Mike messaged me about this weird gig he'd found online. He said it was all hush-hush, but the pay was insane. All I had to do was design some logos and website layouts. The catch? It was all happening on something called the dark web. Now, I'd heard about the dark web before, but I always thought it was just some boogeyman that parents used to scare kids away from the internet, but Mike swore it was legit. He'd been doing some work for these guys for a few weeks and hadn't had any problems. I was skeptical, but man, that money sounded good. My student loans weren't going to pay themselves, and my parents were starting to make noise about me getting a real job or moving back home. So, against my better judgment, I decided to give it a shot. Mike walked me through the process of setting up Tor and accessing the dark web. It felt like I was in some kind of spy movie, all these precautions and special software just to look at websites. But once I got in, it was kind of underwhelming at first. Most of the sites looked like they were designed in the 90s. The job board Mike had told me about was called Midnight Marketplace. It was pretty bare bones, just a list of job postings with brief descriptions and contact info. I scrolled through until I found one looking for a graphic designer. Pay was even better than Mike had said. I sent a message to the contact, trying to sound professional despite how nervous I was. To my surprise, I got a response almost immediately. They asked for some samples of my work, which I sent over. Within an hour, they offered me the job. The first few projects were pretty straightforward. Logo designs for what they said were new startups, website layouts for online stores, nothing that raised any red flags. The money was deposited into a cryptocurrency wallet they'd set up for me. I was feeling pretty good about the whole thing. But then the project started getting weird. They wanted designs for what they called pharmaceutical companies, but the names and descriptions were all off. Logos for businesses with names like Happy Dreams and Cloud9 Enterprises. Websites for stores selling things I'd never heard of, with names that sounded more like code words than products. I started to get suspicious, but the money was so good. I told myself I was just being paranoid. After all, I wasn't doing anything illegal, right? I was just making pictures and layouts. What people did with them wasn't my business. Things escalated quickly after that. The jobs came faster, the designs got stranger, and the pay got even better. I was working almost around the clock, sleeping only a few hours a night. My family started to worry about me, saying I looked tired all the time, asking why I never left my apartment anymore. I brushed them off, told them I was just focused on my freelance work. One night, while I was working on a particularly complex website design, I got a message from a user I didn't recognize. They said they were impressed with my work and had a special job for me. The pay they offered was more than I'd made in the past month combined. The job was to design a series of icons and a user interface for what they called a specialized marketplace. As I worked on it, I started to realize what it really was, a human trafficking site. I felt sick to my stomach. This wasn't just some shady pharmaceutical thing. This was really seriously illegal. I wanted to quit right then and there, but I was scared. These people knew a lot about me. My real name, where I lived, my family's contact info. What if they came after me if I tried to back out? So I finished the job, telling myself it would be the last one. I'd take the money and disappear, maybe move to another state and start over. But when I tried to access my crypto wallet to withdraw the funds, I found it empty. Every cent I'd earned over the past few months was gone. I freaked out. I messaged my contact, demanding to know what happened. Their response chilled me to the bone. They said the money was being held as insurance to guarantee my continued cooperation. If I wanted to see a dime of it, I had to keep working for them. I felt trapped. I couldn't go to the police. I'd been working on illegal sites, even if I didn't know it at first. I couldn't tell my family or friends without putting them at risk. And now these people essentially owned me. For weeks, I was a nervous wreck. I jumped at every sound, expecting the police or some criminals to burst through my door at any moment. I could barely sleep, barely eat. My parents were really worried, kept trying to get me to come home for a while, but I was too scared to leave my apartment. The work kept coming, each job worse than the last. I was designing interfaces for sites selling weapons, drugs, stolen data. I felt like I was helping build an entire underground criminal empire, one logo at a time. I tried to find a way out. I spent hours searching the dark web for anyone who might be able to help me. I found some hacker forums and desperately posted my story, begging for advice. Most of the responses were useless or cruel, but one user seemed sympathetic. They messaged me privately, saying they might be able to help. This user, who went by the handle Phoenix Rising, claimed to be part of a vigilante group that fought against dark web criminals. They said they could help me disappear, give me a new identity, but I had to trust them completely. I was skeptical at first. After all, trusting strangers on the dark web was what got me into this mess in the first place. But as the demands from my employers got more and more extreme, I realized I didn't have much choice. Phoenix Rising gave me a series of instructions. First, I had to gather all the evidence I could. Screenshots of job requests, design files, communication logs, everything. Then, on a specific date and time, I had to upload it all to a secure server they provided. The next step was the scariest. They told me I had to destroy everything. My computer, my phone, anything that could be used to trace my online activities. Then I had to pack a bag with only the essentials and be ready to leave at a moment's notice. I was terrified, but I did everything they said. On the night of the upload, I sat in my apartment, a packed bag at my feet, waiting for further instructions. Minutes felt like hours. I jumped at every sound, convinced that at any moment someone would break down my door. Finally, my burner phone buzzed with a message from Phoenix Rising. It contained an address in Tucson and instructions to go there immediately. I left everything behind. My apartment, my belongings, my entire life, and drove through the night to Tucson. The address turned out to be a small, nondescript office building. Inside, I was met by a group of people who looked nothing like what I expected hackers or vigilantes to look like. They were just normal people. They explained that they were part of an underground network that helped people escape from dark web criminals. Over the next few days, they set me up with a new identity. New name, new background, even new fingerprints. Don't ask me how they managed that. They gave me a crash course in how to live off the grid, how to spot surveillance, how to keep myself safe. They also showed me what they'd done with the information I'd uploaded. They'd used it to take down several major dark web marketplaces and had passed along evidence to international law enforcement. The criminal network I'd been working for was in chaos. I felt relieved, but also terrified. What if someone connected me to the takedown? What if they came looking for revenge? The group assured me that my new identity was airtight, that no one would be able to trace it back to my old life. But it was hard to feel safe after everything I'd been through. They set me up with a new life in a small town in Oregon. New apartment, new job at a local print shop. They even provided me with a cover story to explain my sudden appearance in town. For all intents and purposes, my old self had ceased to exist. It's been a few months now, and I'm still looking over my shoulder every day. I miss my family, my friends, my old life. But I know I can never go back. The dark web isn't just some harmless corner of the internet. It's a dangerous place full of real criminals doing real harm. And once you get pulled in, it's nearly impossible to get out. I don't know what the future holds for me. I'm trying to build a new life, to move on from what happened. But I know I'll never forget the lesson I learned. The internet can be a dangerous place, and the line between the virtual world and the real world is thinner than we think. Be careful out there. And remember, if something seems too good to be true, it probably is. It all started when I lost my job at the local newspaper in Minneapolis. Budget cuts, they said. Just like that. 5 years of hard work down the drain. I was desperate for something, anything to pay the bills. That's when I stumbled across this weird ad on a job board. It was for a content writer, but the description was pretty vague. The pay seemed too good to be true, but I was in no position to be picky. I sent in my application not really expecting much. To my surprise, I got a response within hours. The company, if you could call it that, was called Shadow Scribes. They said they specialized in creating content for alternative markets. Whatever that meant, they wanted me to start right away. The first few assignments were pretty tame. Product descriptions for some off-brand electronics, blog posts about cryptocurrency. Nothing too sketchy. But then things started to get weird. They asked me to write reviews for products I'd never heard of, with names that sounded more like code words than actual items. I should have backed out then, but the money was so good. I told myself I was just writing words, not doing anything illegal. It wasn't my business what people did with the content after I wrote it, right? Things escalated quickly after that. The assignments got stranger, the products more obscure. I was writing user manuals for devices that seemed to have no legitimate purpose, marketing copy for services that gave me the creeps just thinking about them. One day, I got an assignment that I couldn't ignore. They wanted me to write a sales pitch for what was clearly an illegal substance. Not just weed or something mild, but hardcore, dangerous stuff. That's when it hit me. I was working for a dark web marketplace. I panicked. I wanted to quit, to run away from the whole thing. But then I got an email from my contact at Shadow Scribes. They said they were impressed with my work and wanted to offer me a promotion. The new salary they quoted made my eyes bulge. It was more money than I'd ever seen in my life. I knew I should say no. I knew this was dangerous territory, but I thought about my mounting bills, my dwindling savings. I thought about how I could finally pay off my student loans, maybe even buy a house. So against every instinct screaming at me to run, I accepted. That's when they introduced me to the dark web. They sent me instructions on how to access their private network, how to use cryptocurrency, how to cover my tracks online. It was like stepping into a whole new world, a secret internet hidden beneath the surface. At first it was thrilling. I felt like I was in on some big secret, part of an exclusive club. The work was challenging in a twisted sort of way, forcing me to be creative with my writing in ways I never had before. And the money, God, the money was incredible. But as time went on, the reality of what I was doing started to sink in. I was helping sell drugs, weapons, stolen data. I was writing content that was ruining lives, maybe even ending them. The guilt started to eat at me, keeping me up at night. I tried to justify it to myself. I wasn't the one selling this stuff. I was just writing about it. I wasn't forcing anyone to buy anything. But deep down, I knew I was just as guilty as the people actually doing the selling. Things came to a head when they asked me to write content for a human trafficking site. That was a line I couldn't cross, no matter how much money they offered. I told them I was done, that I quit. Their response was chilling. They said I knew too much, that I was in too deep to just walk away. They threatened to expose everything I'd done, to ruin my life if I didn't continue working for them. I was trapped. I couldn't go to the police. I'd been complicit in so many crimes. I couldn't tell my family or friends without putting them at risk. I felt like I was drowning with no way out. For weeks, I was a nervous wreck. I jumped at every sound, expecting the police or some dark web criminals to burst through my door at any moment. I could barely sleep, barely eat. My family was worried, kept asking what was wrong, but I couldn't tell them. How could I explain that I'd gotten myself involved in a global criminal network? I knew I needed help, but I didn't know where to turn. In desperation, I started searching the dark web for anyone who might be able to help me. I found some forums for people in similar situations, but most of the advice was useless or just made me more paranoid. Then I came across a user who seemed different. They went by the handle Lightbringer, and claimed to be part of a group that helped people escape from dark web entanglements. I was skeptical at first. After all, trusting strangers on the dark web was what got me into this mess in the first place. But as the pressure from shadow scribes increased, I realized I didn't have many options left. I reached out to Lightbringer, pouring out my whole story. They listened without judgment and then laid out a plan. It was risky, they said, but it was my best shot at getting out. The plan was this: I would continue working for shadow scribes, but I would start gathering evidence. Every assignment, every communication, every Bitcoin transaction, I needed to document it all. Lightbringer said they had contacts in law enforcement who could use this information to take down the entire network. It was dangerous. If shadow scribes caught on to what I was doing, I'd be in serious trouble. But the alternative, continuing to work for them indefinitely, was unthinkable. So I became a mole. Every day I'd do my assignments as usual, but I was also carefully documenting everything. I set up hidden cameras in my apartment to record my work sessions. I kept meticulous logs of every interaction. I even managed to get some information about other writers working for shadow scribes. Months went by. The stress was unbelievable. Every day I woke up wondering if this would be the day I was found out. I lost weight, could barely sleep. My family was really worried, but I still couldn't tell them what was going on. Finally, after what felt like years but was really only about 6 months, Lightbringer said we had enough. They gave me instructions on how to securely transmit all the evidence I'd gathered. Then they told me to pack a bag and be ready to leave at a moment's notice. The next 48 hours were the most terrifying of my life. I sat in my apartment, jumping at every sound, convinced that at any moment someone would break down my door. When my phone finally buzzed with a message from Lightbringer, I nearly had a heart attack. The message contained an address in St. Paul and instructions to go there immediately. With shaking hands, I grabbed my pre-packed bag and left, possibly for the last time. The address turned out to be a small law office. Inside, I was met by a group of people who introduced themselves as federal agents. They'd been working with Lightbringer's group to take down dark web criminal networks. Over the next few days, I told them everything. Every detail about shadow scribes, every assignment I'd done, every person I'd interacted with. They were particularly interested in the information I'd gathered about the other writers. Turns out shadow scribes had operations all over the world. The agents told me that the evidence I'd provided was crucial. They were planning a coordinated international operation to take down not just shadow scribes, but several other dark web marketplaces as well. As for me, they said I had 2 options. I could enter witness protection, get a new identity, and start over somewhere new. Or I could go back to my life, but with the understanding that I might be called to testify if any cases went to trial. It was a tough decision. The idea of leaving everything behind, my family, my friends, my whole life, was heartbreaking. But the thought of always looking over my shoulder, wondering if someone from my dark web days might come looking for revenge, was terrifying. In the end, I chose witness protection. It was the hardest decision I've ever made, but I knew it was the safest option, not just for me, but for my loved ones too. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. The agents set me up with a new identity, complete with a backstory and all the necessary documentation. They gave me a crash course in how to live under an assumed name, how to avoid leaving digital footprints, how to spot if someone was following me. Finally, the day came for me to leave. I was given one last chance to send messages to my family and friends, goodbye notes that couldn't really explain anything. Then I was put on a plane to my new life. I ended up in a small town in Oregon, about as far from Minneapolis as you could get. New name, new job, new everything. It was like being born again at 30. It's been a year now, and I'm still adjusting. I miss my old life every day. I wonder what my family thinks happened to me, if they're still looking for me. But I know I made the right choice. The work I did for shadow scribes helped ruin lives. At least this way I helped bring some criminals to justice. I'm writing this as a warning. The dark web isn't some cool, edgy part of the internet to explore for fun. It's a dangerous place, full of real criminals doing real harm. And once you get pulled in, it's nearly impossible to get out unscathed. So if you're reading this and thinking about exploring the dark web, or taking some online job that seems too good to be true, take it from me. Don't. No amount of money is worth losing your freedom, your safety, your entire identity. Stay in the light where it's safe, because once you step into the shadows, you might never find your way back out. Thank you for watching. If you found these stories gripping, don't forget to subscribe for more spine-tingling content. For another hair-raising tale, check out our suggested video. And if you're hungry for more eerie encounters, dive into our playlist featuring similar chilling narratives.